Hi there! Warner Discovery's streaming platform Max just had a new round of major expansions in the past year, culminating in a big Southeast Asia launch, and then an entirely new expansion into Australia just a few weeks ago. This is important to us because the Max streamer's international expansion is officially the driving force behind profits for Warner Discovery as a whole. When they do well, we do well. We get more budget for our shows in the Westeros franchise. They've also put out their plans for future expansion waves, biggest of which will be to the Sky Atlantic zone in Europe, which includes big markets like the UK and Germany. In this video, I'm going to be covering the worldwide spread of Max into different markets, so forgive me if I'm intentionally trying to speak slowly and clearly, because I know some people who speak English as a second language might be watching this and relying on the auto-translation, so I'm trying to be clear. First, you have to understand that unlike some of the other top 7 major streaming platforms, HBO Max never finished spreading across the entire globe after the streaming boom began in 2019. The top 3 did. Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney+, they're in every country they're ever going to spread into. For that matter, so did Apple TV, because of their tech company connections. Those 4 out of 7 are everywhere. And bottom of the list, you have Paramount Plus and Peacock, which simply weren't available in some countries. HBO Max was sort of middle of the pack. So rather than not have their content available in all countries, they were able to essentially bootstrap their way up to a global spread by licensing their content out to several third-party distributors in countries where they didn't already have a direct market. Places that already had the old HBO Go over-the-top streaming app, those are the direct markets. Others they had to rely on third parties. Case in point, Sky Atlantic for the UK. So their plan was to first do a global rollout to all of those direct markets, starting with those, and then on a case-by-case basis, they'd have to negotiate an end to each third-party contract to expand into new markets. And even now, they still haven't finished by 2025. But oddly, given their current situation, that's really a cause for optimism, because all the other big streamers have already hit the ceiling. Netflix, Disney+, Amazon, Apple aren't going to have another big international launch ever again. They're everywhere. Whereas Warner's Max streamer still has the potential to gain millions of subscribers in entirely new international markets. That's why there was so much growth this past year when the expansion resumed. By the end of this March, right before but not including the Australia launch, they are up to 122 million subscribers, and optimistically project 150 million by mid-2026. They started 2024 with slightly less than 100 million. They're up to 122, and they think they'll be up to 150. Of course, the top 3, Netflix, Amazon, Disney, have all surpassed 200 million, that benchmark, but because they've all hit the subscriber ceiling, this was the subscriber apocalypse in early 2022 when people panicked for a bit. They've realized it isn't so much about subscribers as it is about profitability. Even so, expansion is expansion, and I just did all these earnings reports for this, and yes, subscriber growth is fueling their profits right now. That their most profitable, only really profitable division is the streaming sector. Now, to give some history for this, HBO Max first launched in the United States May of 2020, later in the streaming boom that started with Disney Plus in fall of 2019, then it was through the rest of that year. For international expansion after that, the plan, summer of 2020, was looking ahead, we'll divide up the world into 3 zones. Latin America, then Europe, Middle East, North Africa, which is known by the acronym EMEA, and then Asia Pacific, third. In that order. It goes west to east like that, across the globe. Now, all of Latin America was already one big direct market. There were no third-party distributors, so that was really straightforward, that as planned, they immediately had this big expansion into all of Latin America, same day, in June of 2021, the next year, all at once, which was really exciting. And looking at the charts for this, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but Brazil is one of their biggest international markets for this. That in terms I've seen social media results by the end of Game of Thrones, on Twitter and Instagram, the number 2 country using hashtags related to Game of Thrones or talking about it was Brazil, ahead of the United Kingdom. That was back then. So that's why they've been having a lot more really big, devoting attention to it panels at the Brazil Comic-Con, CCXP, for House of the Dragon and things, that HBO recognizes this is one of our top international markets, period, much less just Latin America itself. Brazil alone has about as many subscribers, it's about as big of a market as all of the Spanish-speaking parts of Latin America put together, just the way it divides up like that. So this was a big launch. Shout out to all the fan channels from Brazil that I know are watching this, which is also like one of the top 10, I think it's like number 8 country on my viewership here for people who can understand. I know I'm speaking English, but big part of the online audience there. Latin America launch was June of 2021. Then, in late 2021 through early 2022, they launched HBO Max in phases across Europe is very complicated. It's balkanized, literally, that they launched HBO Max across the 3 sub-regions of Europe where there were already those direct markets that didn't have third-party distributors. These 3 were Scandinavia, where HBO Nordic was already pretty well set up, then the Iberian Peninsula, Spain plus Portugal, and then basically upgrading their service that was called HBO Eastern Europe, which is Poland south through the Balkans, but not including the Baltics or Greece. HBO Eastern Europe. And on top of that, while they were at it, in the last phase of this, when they were wrapping up the Europe Direct Market launch in March 2022, remember that date, at the end of this, they outright expanded into a new market that had never had it before, that up to then had a third party, the Netherlands. Up to then, I think they're using something called Zippo, this third party, but that was an outright new expansion into, disproportionate to its size, because it's a big economy, expanding into the Netherlands. This was all exciting. But just then, spring of 2022, as they say, a monkey wrench was thrown in the works, when suddenly, and we weren't expecting this, Discovery bought Time Warner to make Warner Discovery under David Zaslav. They had a lot of restructuring and red tape to work through, so at the time they said, we are going to have to pause our international expansion waves, and we're not going to resume them for about 2 years. This slammed the brakes on everything. That because there's a moratorium on you can't have more corporate mergers, which is involved in these expansions like that. When you move in, you're technically expanding. So legally, they could not, and they had to work through the red tape. But they said, mark your calendars, by spring of 2024, we're going to resume this. And that's kind of why they had financial problems with their streamer for 2023 and before that everyone else had already finished expanding and was getting money from it, because the phrase, you have to work at scale, that to have a streamer like this that's fueling expensive hits like this, Disney Plus can afford Star Wars and Marvel movies because they're in every country. But HBO Max was making that scale of shows with half the audience, just because they physically weren't in half the world, and their expansion was paused due to legal reasons. And this is officially, they openly admitted it, and I just did report videos on this, why their financial position improved so much across 2024, it is directly linked to the fact that they were allowed to resume expansion into international markets. Now, as I keep having to stress, HBO Max was never just HBO. It was a misleading name. It was really the streaming platform for the entire Time Warner corporate family, from HBO to TBS to Cartoon Network. At the time, Discovery Plus was the 8th largest streamer. So after the corporate merger, they combined Discovery Plus streamer with HBO Max to make Max. Just Max is separate from HBO Max. This is the combined, we have Discovery Plus in it. And there's a few things I've watched on that, like documentaries. The first really big hit they had from Discovery but put on Max was that great Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV documentary, which was really popular this past spring, a full year ago. So that's how the merged content is working. So they realized, not only do we have to continue our international expansion, we face the problem of how are we going to upgrade places that already have HBO Max into the combined Max. And their plan was to just restart. We'll restart in essentially the same order to resynchronize everything like a watch. That, because it was interrupted, we'll restart with first the merged service in the United States, then Latin America, the direct markets, then the direct markets in Europe, and then get to Asia, starting back over again. Latin America, which was already one big direct market and already had it, was the first to get the upgrade in February of 2024. Then, going through the same pattern, the upgrade came to the parts of Europe that already had it. First in May, when they upgraded Scandinavia, Spain, Portugal, Eastern Europe, and the Netherlands. But then, by June, they actually expanded into an outright new market that had never even had HBO Max before. France. Well, France and Belgium. And they timed the launch to coincide with both the Paris Olympics, because it gets a lot of TV coverage, and the premiere of House of the Dragon Season 2, that they do try to time these to their main tentpole launches for content. And at the time, the France launch added something like 7 million new subscribers at a stroke. Like the top 3 that have already hit the ceiling don't really see subscriber growth like that fast. Then, late in the year, very recently, I only just got to report on this past November, you could measure this in weeks, this past November of 2024, they finally expanded into Southeast Asia. Now, remember I said that the expansion waves for the old HBO Max suddenly stopped. They were paused in spring of 2022 because of the merger? That was before they ever got a chance to launch HBO Max in Southeast Asia. Originally, they were going to do that in fall of 2022, but they slammed the brakes on it. So this entire time, up through November of 2024, 6 months ago, people in Southeast Asia were still relying on the old HBO Go platform. The one that launched in 2010, that I remember as being a new thing when I was watching Game of Thrones Season 2 in 2012. They were still using to watch House of the Dragon Season 2. It's just, they fell through the cracks like that. It's unfortunate, and I get a decent number of people watching my channel from the Philippines, because a decent number of people there speak English as a second language, and I've been talking with them through the comment sections about, oh yeah, we're still stuck using HBO Go. So good for them, and please give a shout out if you're from there in the comments. And with the upgrade to Southeast Asia, it wasn't just an upgrade, it was a launch, because they never even got the intervening HBO Max. But with that concluded getting their streamer, the most recent update, Max, to every direct market in the world. There's no longer any direct market country that doesn't have it. All that remains is the slower process of negotiating contracts to end with the third-party distributors, who basically are trying to pay them more than they think they would gain by launching Max there, but at a certain point they just can't afford it anymore, and then Max moves in. Case in point, how France up to this year was using OCS streamer, but then Max moved in when their contract ran out. And indeed, after that, a big launch in an entirely new country did just happen 1 month ago, when Max launched in Australia on March 31st. Coincidentally, the same day House of the Dragon Season 3 started filming, but up to this point, Australia had been licensing HBO content to third-party Foxtel on their streamer called Binge in Australia, which, according to charts I've seen, is something like the number 7 streamer in Australia, behind Paramount Plus. When you are behind Paramount Plus, you have problems. My hope is, now that Australia has the better Max streamer, it'll perform better than Binge did, and give a good boost to viewership numbers for the Westeros franchise there. And it's already decently big. I mean, luck of the draw, some of the top 2 out of 10 YouTube channels devoted to Westeros are Alt Shift X and Glidus. Both happen to be from Australia. But otherwise, we could be doing double the numbers that we have now from there, because Binge wasn't really good. And I get even more people from Australia than, like, Philippines or something, because, first language English. Australia is the number 5 country on my channel, behind Canada and Germany. So please, tell me in the comments, what do you think about the new Max streamer if you're from Australia? If you've switched to it, if I'm lucky enough that some of you have bought it already, what do you think about the interface, the options it's giving you, pricing, anything, compared to what you were using with Binge? And if you don't have it already, please ask questions, and I'll try to keep you informed as best I can. But this was a huge launch in an English as a primary language country. We haven't had that. We had Latin America, we had the other stuff. This was pretty big. This rarely happens. We're still not in other places like the UK and Canada. Australia got it March 31st, and so this is all fresh news. We don't even have the numbers for how many subscribers they got yet. They said that'll come out in the second quarter report, a full 3 months from now. It's just too soon. And just 2 weeks later, April 15th, about 1 month ago, Max also expanded into Turkey. Turkey is counted as part of Europe, not part of the Middle East division, but they've also launched in Turkey. That's the most recent expansion. That brings us up to the present. Where is left to expand? Short version is that they tentatively hope to expand to Europe's Sky Atlantic zone in early 2026, in time for House of the Dragon Season 3, which will be premiering in summer, but they said at some point first half of the year, in time for House of the Dragon Season 3, it'll be launching there. And the Sky Atlantic Zone includes huge markets. The United Kingdom, well, all the British Isles, also Republic of Ireland, and Germany, that on my YouTube channel, which skews towards English speakers, but UK is our number 2 country, and Germany is usually number 3 or 4. And on top of that, Italy, plus also Austria and Switzerland. I know the French-speaking parts of Switzerland use the France service, but this is the biggest market launch, arguably bigger than when they were in Latin America, slightly bigger than that. Big economies with a lot of people who are watching streaming services. And this will give a mega boost to their profits, which in turn go back into their shows. At this point, it's for the past few years, it's always been, well, about 2 years from now. At this point, they're saying about 1 year from now, because I'm making this in May. They said within the next about 10 to 12 months, we're going to be launching in the UK and Germany and the rest of the Sky Atlantic Zone. The Australia and Turkey launches were really the big launches of 2025. We don't expect any other huge ones for the rest of the year, or on the scale of the Southeast Asia launch that happened last fall. There might be 1 or 2 regional ones, and I'll explain that as I go. Well, For starters, looking at the big board, at the world map I put together, let me quickly rule out where they will never expand. That the countries I blacked out because these are pariah states, or even Netflix and Disney Plus have no intention of ever expanding, like, North Korea or Iran, Afghanistan, Russia, that everyone yanked their services out of there. Also, mainland China, because I know mainland China technically gets a heavily edited, watered down version of their content, but they already get it. It's not really the same thing. I don't really think that counts, but there isn't going to be this giant launch of Max there any more than there would be for Netflix. That isn't really a thing, the way they work that out. And notice, just looking, geographically on a map in terms of where are pariah states, this forbidden zone is all one contiguous chunk, land area across the middle of Eurasia. Basically, if you draw a line through the Persian Gulf and Caspian Sea up to the Arctic, and then in the south, along the Himalayas, through the jungles of Southeast Asia to the border with China, it's all this loose square that's the cursed earth. Like north of the Korean DMZ and north of the Himalayas, it's just this is not where we have things. Cuba is an exception, by the way. That is not a pariah state anymore. Like, I know Cuba gets Netflix. They just haven't announced any intentions to expand there with Max. That's like asterisk, the one part of Latin America that they're not actively trying to expand into. It's not as if it's a big market. And similarly in Europe, like Albania is not a... Literally yesterday someone asked me about this in the comments, what about Albania? They don't get Netflix and Disney Plus, but they do get Paramount, and it's like you have to go through a third-party service. It's not a pariah state, but these are the fringes, where I just leave that gray, where it's not as if it's a big market compared to like Sky Atlantic, so it's not going to be a huge launch or anything, just the little things. But we're talking about the big scale things like Australia, Canada, the UK. Keeping that in mind, what are the remaining third-party distributors worldwide? And what countries or regions do they cover? Let's do a full inventory of this. Well, the way Warner approached it was to divide up the world into those 3 zones and proceed west to east, so I'll go in that order. Western Hemisphere to start with. Notice that the first zone is officially called Latin America, not including Canada. Canada uses the third-party Bell Media, and they air HBO Max content through their streaming platform called Crave. 1 or 2 of these third parties, just looking at my map here, they don't neatly fit into one of the megazones. I mean, even if Canada ever did get Max, it wouldn't be, lumped in with Latin America, not just due to language, but different viewing patterns. I mean, like, Canada likes hockey, Latin America likes soccer. Telenovelas are bigger in Latin America than they are in Canada. Just different viewing clusters. It's fascinating when I've seen like Netflix break down the viewing habits of different regions of the world are different. That just Latin America would always not include Canada, so I don't know how they'd ever do that. Similarly, like I said, Australia is different from like Japan and Thailand in terms of not just language but viewing habits, so administratively, that's not something I'm in charge of. It's beyond my pay grade of, do you include this as one zone or not? It's part of their programming zones at this point, not expansion zones. But I am going to lump in Australia with talking about the Pacific just because it's there, but for convenience. At any rate, starting with Canada, Bell Media renewed their contract multi-year, which means they are officially not going to get Max for the foreseeable future, at least the next 2 or 3 years. And actually, most of the remaining third parties have renewed their contracts, but I just want to run down their geographic spread. After Canada, which is kind of its own thing there, we then turn to Zone EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa. Europe tends to have each little country, even though they're smaller, they're disproportionately large economies. So was this patchwork of many third parties when we began this. That like the Netherlands had its own third party Zippo, And I'm not going to go through the whole history of this, but when we started 5 years ago, all the little ones, we had to look at the map and see where they were expanding. It's the most complex out of anywhere in the world, so we have to zoom in on the Europe map when we're discussing this. But at this point, now that they have the 3 direct markets, plus France, plus Netherlands and everything, there's only one really big region left because it's the only other big multinational third-party streamer that covers more than one country, Sky Atlantic, which is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, that everywhere else is just, well, this is France, this is Japan. This is the only one left, well, in Europe, that's a big multinational that we have to worry about, that has this big of an economy that they're actively planning to launch into. And like I said, they're aiming for early 2026. The only thing left to discuss are, after Sky Atlantic, what I call the fringes of Europe. That remember how the last expansion wave for the original HBO Max was March of 2022? I said, remember that date? When they did that launch into Poland and the Netherlands, they openly said, our next launch will also include these 6 other countries in Europe in summer. Then the merger interrupted everything. Those 6 countries included Turkey, Greece, the 3 Baltic states, and Iceland. Now, Turkey just got Max a few weeks ago. Greece officially will not. Their local streamer Vodafone, which I've heard isn't very good, renewed their contract, just like Canada. The contracts for the 3 Baltic states, however, are up this coming July, only 2 months from now. So when I said that there might be smaller regional launches this calendar year, that's what I was talking about, that we might see some launches in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania later this year when the contracts run out. Luck of the draw, there's a few figures in House of the Dragon fandom who I know someone, Celinda, who's from Estonia and asked me about this, so Baltic might get a launch wrapping things up later this year. We don't know what's going on with Iceland. I would assume maybe they're around the same time. We don't know when their contract expires. There's not that many people there. Oh, another side note, this was a mystery for a while, that yes, I eventually managed to look it up. Greenland is officially considered part of Denmark, so when Denmark got it, Greenland got it. So that's why I shaded it in the same color, that they officially get Max because they're part of Denmark. But stepping back and looking at Europe as a whole, on the scale of these 5 years, it appears that by early 2026, after they've launched in the Sky Atlantic region, they'll have already launched in the Baltics and Iceland. By the time House of the Dragon Season 3 airs summer of 2026, 1 year from now, basically all of Europe will have Max. Except for Greece, which just renewed their multi-year contract, so I'm sorry about that, but who would have thought that the Greeks would be schismatics, splitting apart from the rest of Europe? The Greeks, of all people. Once you get past Europe itself, though, for the wider zone EMEA, despite their size, there's actually just 2 other big regional streamers. One that covers all of the Middle East and one that covers all of Africa, so you only have 2 other ones to talk about. It's actually pretty straightforward. The Arabic-speaking Middle East and North Africa region is covered by OSN, which is based in Dubai. And they have major markets in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. I specified Arabic-speaking, that OSN does not service Turkey. Turkey was its own thing, part of Europe. They already got Max. That's separate. OSN also just renewed their multi-year contract, so they're not going to get Max as such next couple of years. But from what I have heard from people I asked across social media, they said they have a pretty decent platform for getting, compared to like the Greek people I've talked to said Vodafone does a terrible job of providing us with this content. They said, no, OSN actually has a really good setup and in service and everything. Interesting thing that just happened the past few weeks, though. Even though they Warner Discovery renewed their contract with OSN, like a month ago, they bought 1/3 of the stock in OSN. So now Warner Discovery and Zaslav own a 1/3 share of OSN. So are they ever going to expand it there, or are they going to be content to be the shadow parent company, 1/3 owners, like the way Hulu used to be? I'm not really sure, but it's weird that they do own a third. Imagine if Warner owned 1/3 of Sky Atlantic. How different that would be. Is this a step towards absorption? I don't know. That's very unusual. And then moving on, basically all of sub-Saharan Africa is serviced by one big regional streamer called Showmax, based in South Africa. Most of their viewership, of course, is in Africa's 3 largest economies, so in order, South Africa, then Nigeria, and Kenya, that kind of thing. But you could plausibly, through satellite and stuff, get the streaming service anywhere sub-Sahara there. Showmax is actually doing really, really well. Just in terms of global streaming patterns, Showmax beat Netflix. There's whole articles on this in Variety and stuff that at the start of the streaming boom, everyone was overexpanding. So the top dogs, Netflix, Amazon Prime, were trying to expand into Africa and Southeast Asia. And tell me if you remember this, if you're from there, in the comments. They would put together local content packages, try to enter it. 2 or 3 years later, when everyone hit the subscriber ceiling, they realized this just isn't profitable. That point when the streamers were throwing money at everything, and then there was a point they realized we're not seeing a return on this investment, let's cut back. So you see a retreat by Netflix and Amazon Prime from original content in Southeast Asia. They shut down their offices there. And in Africa, and I've seen whole trade articles on how Showmax managed to outcompete Netflix. Amazon Prime is just a fringe thing there. Disney Plus doesn't even have a foothold. So, point of this is, while I haven't heard official word about renewing their contract with Showmax, if Disney Plus can't expand there, succeed in expanding there, I do not see Max launching there. That Showmax managed to win the streaming game there, and they're even outcompeting Netflix. How did this happen? Well, from what I've heard, they just put together a lot better local content packages, that they know the market better, and that they put together local content packages. Who would want to watch the Housewives of Orange County there? No, they made a regional version called The Real Housewives of Lagos. I've seen clips of it on YouTube and stuff. Also, like the historical drama about Shaka Zulu is really popular in South Africa now. Along with a bunch of other things like Nigeria, they have this thing based on local history, so they managed to put together decent local content packages in place that the other big global powers playing there. It's amazing that the streaming scramble for Africa was won by a domestic Africa streamer, Showmax. And if you think I'm focusing on this, I do get people in my comments from South Africa. It's like the number 15 country on my channel, but again, that whole people who at least speak English as a second language, I have more contact with people in South Africa on my channel than I do like from Japan or something. And they ask, when are we going to get this? And I don't foresee them getting that at any point in the near future. So that's Middle East and Africa. Now we turn to the final zone, Asia Pacific. Now, despite its size, Asia is actually pretty straightforward, because there's only 4 regions to know. 5 if you because I'm lumping in New Zealand, that'll be the 5th one, but there's really only 4 regions. Like I said, Europe was this complex patchwork of all these local things, but because I've blacked out like mainland China, North Korea and stuff, there's only 4 things you need to keep track of. Southeast Asia, all one big combined direct market, which already just got Max. Then India, Japan, and Korea. That's it, plus New Zealand at the end. HBO already had one big multinational direct market in Southeast Asia, which is HBO Southeast Asia is based in Singapore. That's where their offices are. And they finally launched this past November. It includes Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, which are disproportionate in their size, and the Philippines. Again, please give a shout out if you're from the Philippines and watching this. There's also like one or two other things that Vietnam was part of their Southeast Asia thing, wasn't included in the launch, and they said we had to negotiate it more with the smaller ones there, but this is basically the launch they're getting. India is a huge market, roughly equal to Western Europe. Viewership for the Westeros franchise started there relatively late when India got a licensing deal through Hotstar back in 2017, but it was weird when we were watching Season 7 and went, why are there all these Indian viewers in the comments and Hindi language YouTube channels starting up that were never there before, all of a sudden late in the run of the show? And they explained, well, we just got it on our streamer here. So they came a little late to the table that way, but the Westeros franchise is huge in India now. It is a big part of it's in my top 10. It is set to enter the top 5 if growth rates continue as they have. And remember how I said that those social media surveys at the end of Game of Thrones said that Brazil was the number 2 country talking about it. On Instagram, India was number 4. So they are pretty high up there in terms of online discussion and audiences for this. At the time, they were using Hotstar, which was owned by Disney, and you don't want stuff owned by your competitors. Since then, they have shifted their contract to a different, not affiliated with Disney company, GeoCinema. Unfortunately, once again, in this case, the third-party distributor renewed their license again. That GeoCinema has renewed their multi-year contract with Max, so for at least the next 2 or 3 years foreseeable future, Max will not be launching in India. But I'm saying, looking ahead for the next 3 years, the next huge launch on the scale of, my god, they're launching in all of Latin America or all of Scandinavia, the next huge one will be Sky Atlantic. After Sky Atlantic, just looking out 3 to 5 years ahead, the one really huge market we are looking forward to, top of the list, will be the India launch. That is the thing to get excited for, just in terms of global subscriber growth and profit. That will be big. Rounding out the list, Japan's third-party distributor is local streamer Unext. They have also renewed their contract, but at least compared to like Vodafone in Greece, they have a pretty good delivery model, where they said they were building a dedicated Max content hub within the Unext interface, so it's easy to find their stuff. Some of these things, they just shove the content in, they don't showcase it, it's lazy, it's not even making good return on the investment they got. You paid for it, why wouldn't you show it off? That they have this dedicated Max hub, it's a pretty well set up deal they have. Interesting detail about that. That when they put together this deal with Japan's Unext, and they said we're going to have a good delivery hub for it, the deal was stated to be a mutual content sharing arrangement. That basically, instead of trying to buy out Unext, which would have been expensive to do a direct launch there, they said that Unext would keep running HBO content on their platform in Japan, and in return, Unext will start giving Max first access to several of their anime series. They didn't specify which ones or when they will start. I'm not really sure, but they said we had a choice between buying them out and not making a lot of money, or leave their third-party status and they'd give us first pick on some anime stuff. Right now, Max, well, they do have the Ghibli library, but that's about it. So would they get like the rights to Attack on Titan or something, which does air on Adult Swim? Well, cable is different from the legal rights for streaming, so I don't know. But they promised at the time, we will start trying to get anime on there through this. And then we have South Korea, which is a disproportionately very large economy with a big streaming market. Their distributor is Wave. And this is one bright spot, that we have heard zero word about them renewing their contract. On top of that, it seems Warner is actively trying to build up a Max launch there. That for the past 2 or 3 years, we have seen reports that they are building up local content packages, that they tried to make a local Korean version of The Mentalist or something. that they are gearing up and targeting a Korea launch. I have no idea when. For all I know, there might be a South Korea launch this coming fall. We haven't heard word of it, but with no renewal in place, that is going to happen sooner instead of later. I like to hope it'll come out before House of the Dragon Season 3 there. But that's one of the regions to watch, along with when I say regional launches, the Baltics and South Korea are the only other launches that might be happening. And finally, absolute last on the worldwide map is New Zealand, which I'm lumping in here kind of with Asia because, well, it's Asia-Pacific, kind of, that Australia and New Zealand are always off doing their own thing. And for that matter, some people assume, ANZAC, maybe they're together. No, New Zealand never used the same streaming service that Australia did. That Australia had Foxtel's Binge. Their distributor is Sky New Zealand. No relation to Sky Atlantic from the UK. And Sky New Zealand's streaming platform is called Neon. They have also signed a multi-year renewal contract, so New Zealand will not be getting Max in the next 2 or 3 years of the foreseeable future. So, in summary, for my entire report here, the rest of 2025 might see some smaller regional launches here or there. Specifically in July, we're looking at the Baltics. South Korea is a big question mark, which might come at some point in the next year, we're not really sure. Everyone else renewed their contracts for the next at least 2 or 3 years. But after that, the big one on the horizon is early 2026, when they launch across the Sky Atlantic zone. Huge markets in the UK, Germany, and Italy, just how massive that is going to be. Places that this will be the equivalent of when the streaming wars began. When, wow, we're getting the old HBO Max in 2021 in Latin America. The Max upgrade this past year was nice, but the amount of subscribers that is going to add on a global scale for just all of the fan base that we've had contacts with through Game of Thrones fandom for over a decade, that we're still having to do stuff through Sky Atlantic. It'll be really big to see that change. Otherwise, the remaining major third-party distributors just on the chart here, these are the big ones that you need to remember at all, are Bell Media with Crave in Canada, OSN in the Middle East, Showmax in Africa, GeoCinema in India, Unext in Japan, and Neon in New Zealand. Those 6, those are the remaining ones. At the start of 2024, they were up to the threshold of 100 million worldwide subscribers. Right before the Australia launch 6 weeks ago, they were up to 122 million, thanks to all these upgrades, plus the France launch, plus the Southeast Asia launch. They expect to get about another 25 million or so from the Sky Atlantic launch next year, so they are cautiously optimistic that they can be up to 150 million by the time House of the Dragon Season 3 comes out. Inching towards being that threshold of 200 million that the top 3 have, that they are trying to establish themselves as the 4th major one. And they really did turn a corner financially this year. If you haven't seen my big financial report, check that out. This is what we are looking at the moment. There's a few other launches. I'm not going to make another giant summary of everything when we get the launch in like the Baltics or South Korea or something. I will make a news video for that referring back to this. Otherwise, until we have solid news about the Sky Atlantic launch, this is covered for the next year. So please tell me in the comments I'm really interested. What countries are you from outside the United States? What do you think of your local service? Both if you just got Max, how does it compare to what you were using? If you don't have Max, what do you think of your current distributor? What could be improved? I will try to respond to all of them. And the global domination wave continues to spread upwards and onwards.